I wasn't supposed to be in the stairwell. I ducked in to take a breath between meetings, and her voice carried down from the landing above, low and unguarded in a way I'd never once heard it in 3 years of arguing with her. I expected office gossip, a complaint about a client, maybe a complaint about me. Instead, she said it plainly, to whoever was on the line, in a voice gone soft at the edges. He has no idea. None. I've been in love with him for years, and he thinks I can't stand him. And I stood frozen on the steps below, because she was talking about a him, and there was only one man she fought with like that, and it was me. My name is Elliot Shaw. I'm 35. I'm a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm. I make sure buildings stay up, which is satisfying in the way of work, whose failures would be obvious, and whose successes are invisible. I'm precise, a little stubborn, and better at load calculations than at people, and I'd spent 3 years applying my considerable analytical powers to every problem in my life except the one standing at the desk across from mine. Her name was Priya Sani. She was an architect at the same firm, and from her first week she had been my professional opposite in every way that the job allowed. She designed the beautiful impossible thing, and I was the one who had to tell her it would collapse. And we had turned that natural friction into something close to an art form. She was quick and sharp and dressed like every meeting was a decision she'd already won. She kept a dented steel travel mug covered in stickers from conferences she swore she never enjoyed, one of which was a cartoon beaver holding a tiny blueprint that she refused to explain. She had a habit of muttering at her drawings under her breath, a running argument with her own designs, and I'd long ago stopped pretending I didn't lean toward my side of the partition just to catch it. She knew how I took my coffee, which was strange, now that I thought about it, for a woman who claimed to find me insufferable, and she knew exactly which of my silences meant she'd won a point, and which meant I was about to come back harder. We met in a design review my first month, when she presented a cantilever I called aspirational and she called visionary, and we argued about it for 40 minutes in front of the whole firm, and afterward she'd said, "You're going to be a problem, aren't you?" And I'd said, "Only the load-bearing kind." And that was it. From that day, we were rivals. The firm loved it, paired us on projects because the tension produced good work, treated us like a double act, let us bicker in meetings as a kind of entertainment. There was a betting pool, I found out later, about whether we'd ever come to blows. Nobody had thought to bet on the other thing. We competed for the good projects and the lead architect's ear and the satisfaction of being the one who was right. And we kept a running scoreboard that existed only in our heads and that we both took far too seriously. And I told myself, for 3 years, that I disliked her. That the charge in the air between us was friction, and nothing more. That was the lie I lived in, and it was a comfortable one. Because as long as it was a rivalry, I never had to ask what the rivalry was standing in for. A rivalry is safe. A rivalry has rules. You always know where you stand with someone who's trying to beat you, and you never have to find out where you'd stand if you stopped fighting and tried something more frightening instead. It cracked open on an ordinary Tuesday in the building's back stairwell between the 4th floor and the 5th. I'd had a brutal morning of meetings, and I ducked into the stairwell the way you do when you need 90 seconds of not being looked at. It was cool and gray in there, the smell of concrete and the faint metal of the handrail, the muffled hum of the building through the fire door. I was halfway up to the 5th floor when I heard her voice from the landing above, and I stopped, because she didn't know anyone was there, and her voice was doing something I'd never heard it do. It was soft. The armor was off. She was talking to someone, her sister, I'd learn later, and she sounded tired and honest in a way that the woman who argued me to a standstill in conference rooms never let herself sound. "No, because it's been 3 years," she was saying. 3 years, and he has no idea. None. He thinks I can't stand him. I argue with him about cantilevers, because it's the only way I get to have his full attention for 40 minutes. Which is, yes, I know how that sounds. I know. Don't. I've been in love with him for years, and I've built an entire personality around pretending the opposite. And the worst part is, it's working. He genuinely thinks I hate him. There was a pause while whoever was on the line said something, and then Priya laughed, short and bitter, the laugh of someone laughing at themselves. Tell him? And lose the one thing I've got? Right now I have the arguments. I have him reading my drawings line by line just to disagree with me. The second I tell him, one of two things happens. He doesn't feel it, and I've blown up the best working relationship of my life, and I have to look at him every day knowing he knows, or he does feel it. And then it's real, and real things break, and I lose even the fighting. Another pause. No, I'd rather him as an enemy I get to see every day than risk having nothing. That's not pathetic, Maya. That's risk management. That landed. I went still. Not dramatically, just still, one hand on the cold rail, halfway up a flight of stairs, my heart doing something violent and entirely unprofessional. Because she was talking about a man she fought with about cantilevers, and there was exactly one of those, and he was standing on the steps below her holding his breath. I could hear my own pulse. I could hear the building hum through the door, and I could hear, very clearly, that the woman I'd spent 3 years believing found me insufferable had just described, to her sister, the precise architecture of my own cowardice, built from the opposite side. I should have left. The decent thing was to slip back down and let her keep the conversation she thought was private. Instead, I stood frozen, and the fire door on the 4th floor swung shut somewhere below with a clang, and I heard her go silent above me. And I did the only thing my panicking engineer's brain could manage. I walked up the last few steps like I'd just arrived, like I'd heard nothing, and said, "Oh, stairs are faster than that elevator. Hey," in the least convincing voice a human has ever produced. She was standing at the rail, phone already lowered, and her face was doing something complicated. She looked at me, and then at the phone, and then at me again, and the color climbed up her neck, and I watched a very smart woman do the math on exactly how long I'd been standing there. "How long were you on the stairs?" she said. Not a question. Flat. Elliot, how long? I have never been a good liar. Structural engineers tend not to be. Because the truth is the only thing that holds. "Long enough," I said. "I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to. I came in for air and you were already talking, and I froze, and that's the worst possible thing I could have done, I know. I'm sorry." She closed her eyes. For a second, the whole sharp architecture of her just came down. "Well," she said quietly, "that's 3 years of work undone in 90 seconds. Efficient. You'd appreciate the efficiency." "Priya, you don't have to," she said fast, opening her eyes, and now the armor was scrambling back up, the words coming quick and defensive. "You don't have to do anything about it. We can pretend you heard nothing. I'll be mortified privately, on my own time, and Monday we'll argue about the atrium, and everything goes back to exactly how it was. Which has been fine. It's been a good rivalry. I'd genuinely rather keep it then. So, please. If you're about to be kind, don't. I'm giving you the out. Take it." She tried to make her voice light, and didn't quite get there. "Take the out, Elliot. I started noticing it all then. In a rush. 3 years of evidence I'd filed under rivalry reorganizing itself in real time. The coffee. She knew how I took it. She'd hand me one before a long review without comment, and I'd assumed it was strategic, a way to soften me before a fight. Except she didn't do it for anyone else on the team, and I'd never once let myself ask why. The cantilever arguments. 40 minutes every time, about things we could have settled in 5. It's the only way I get to have his full attention for 40 minutes. She'd just told her sister the answer to a question I'd never been brave enough to ask, that the fighting had never been about the buildings, the late nights. How often it was just the two of us left on the floor before a deadline, arguing across the partition, and how neither of us ever seemed to actually leave, and how I told myself that was about the work, too. The promotion. 8 months back, I'd been up for a senior role against an external candidate, and Priya, my rival, the woman who lived to beat me, had gone into the lead architect's office and, I found out later from a colleague, argued for 20 minutes that the firm would be insane to bring in an outsider over me. She never told me. She let me think I'd won it on my own. Rivals don't fight your corner behind closed doors and then hide that they did it. I'd filed that under strange and never let myself file it under anything truer. The beaver mug with a tiny blueprint, which she'd once held up and said, "This has followed me through every job I've ever had," and looked at me a half-second too long before changing the subject. I'd missed it. I'd been so committed to the rivalry that I couldn't see I was standing in the middle of the thing it had been hiding, and I realized, standing on that stairwell landing, that I'd been doing the exact same thing she had. That I came in early on the days she did. That I'd memorized which silences were which. That every woman I dated in 3 years I'd compared to the architect across the partition and pretended I wasn't. That I'd built an entire rivalry to give myself a sanctioned reason to spend my days locked in argument with her. Because rival was a word I could survive, and the real word terrified me. That is the lie I'd lived in for 3 years, that contempt and attention are different things. They are not. I had been paying attention to that woman with the focus of a man studying for an exam he was terrified to fail, and I'd called it a rivalry because rivalry asked nothing of me. I had poor survival instincts around women who could out-argue me, and Priya could out-argue a load-bearing wall. "I'm not going to take the out," I said. She went very still, so I stopped being careful. All at once, the way you set down something you've carried so long you'd forgotten it was heavy. "You said you argue with me about cantilevers to get 40 minutes of my attention," I said. "Priya, I prepare for those arguments. I stay up the night before a review thinking of points, and I've told myself for 3 years it was professional rigor. And it was never professional rigor. It was that arguing with you is the best part of my week, and I couldn't admit I wanted the best part of my week to be a person." My throat closed, and I pushed through it. "I come in early on the days you do. I lean toward the partition to hear you mutter at your drawings. Every woman I've dated I compared to you and pretended I wasn't. When something goes right at work, you're the first person I want to tell, except I can't, so I pick a fight instead, because fighting with you is the only way I let myself near you. You built a rivalry to hide in. So did I. We've been hiding in the same one from opposite sides for 3 years. The mug, she'd picked it up off the rail at some point, holding it like a shield, went still in her hands. And then the smallest sound, half a laugh and half something breaking open, the sound of a person who'd braced for the worst and gotten the opposite. 3 years, she said, her voice cracking. 3 years, Elliot. We are the 2 stupidest people in a building full of people who design load paths for a living. And not one of us could find the path from my desk to yours. I told my sister 30 seconds ago that my entire strategy was working perfectly. Your strategy was a catastrophic structural failure. I'd flag it in any inspection. You overheard it in a stairwell. That's not me failing. That's you trespassing. But she was laughing now, the wet, undone kind. My sister is still on the phone. She heard all of that. She is never going to let either of us live this down. For what it's worth, I said, You weren't wrong. The risk management. I did the same calculation 100 times. If I said it and you didn't feel it, I lose the best part of every week and have to keep sitting across a partition from you knowing. The math always came out the same. Don't say anything. Keep what you've got. I ran that equation for 3 years and never once questioned the inputs. And now? Now I think we both forgot to account for the cost of the silence, I said. We priced the risk of telling each other and never priced 3 years of not. That's a rookie error. We'd both fail a junior who missed it. I shook my head. You said you'd rather have me as an enemy you see every day than risk having nothing. I'd rather risk everything than spend 1 more year arguing about cantilevers to feel close to you. I'm done managing the risk. I want the building, not the blueprint of a building I'm too scared to put up. She was quiet for a second, the laugh fading into something raw. That's the most architectural thing anyone's ever said to me, she said. I hate that it worked. I could, in fact, hear a tinny voice still coming faintly from the phone in her hand, saying something that sounded a lot like, "Oh my God." Finally, Priya looked down at it, said, "I'm hanging up now, Maya. I will call you with a full report," and ended the call, and then she set the mug down on the windowsill of the landing, careful, and crossed the small distance between us. I met her there. The first kiss tasted like the bad break room coffee she'd been drinking, and 3 years of arguing finally ending in a draw. And somewhere below us the fire door clanged again, and neither of us cared. 3 months later, the beaver mug lived on the corner of my desk, which scandalized the entire floor and confirmed 3 years of office betting pools. And we still argued about cantilevers. Except now I did it leaning over her drafting table, with my chin nearly on her shoulder, and I'd stopped pretending the arguments were about the buildings. We never quite managed to keep it professional. The firm gave a seminar on workplace conduct that the managing partner clearly enjoyed assembling. We sat through it holding hands under the table like the load-bearing problem we'd always been. The early weeks were strange in the way only 3 years of rivalry suddenly becoming something else can be. We kept reaching for the old reflexes, the reflexive disagreement, the scoring of points, and finding the ground had moved under them. She'd start to argue with me out of pure habit, get halfway through, and then realize she didn't have to win anymore, and stand there stranded between 2 versions of herself. I kept bracing for a fight every time she walked over, and having to relearn that she might just be walking over. We figured out, slowly, that we could keep the arguing for fun and put the truth underneath it instead of in place of it. Nothing about us had changed. Except everything had. A year after that, we got assigned to opposite sides of the same design dispute by a project lead who hadn't heard. And we argued across a conference table for an hour, genuinely, ruthlessly, the old way, and then walked out, got in the same car, and she said, "God, I missed that," and I knew exactly what she meant. The rivalry never died. It just stopped being a wall and became the thing we did for fun. Years later, when people ask how we got together, Priya tells it as a security breach. He eavesdropped on my private confession in a stairwell, she says, which is, I'll point out, a violation of at least one workplace policy, and then had the audacity to make it romantic. 3 years of flawless emotional concealment, undone by a man who took the stairs. And then she adds the part that matters, quietly. Because the biggest things between us were always said quietly, that we'd both built the same rivalry from opposite sides, each certain we were the only one hiding in it, fighting about cantilevers for 3 years, because it was the only safe way to stand close. Nothing new appeared in that stairwell. It had simply, finally, stopped hiding. The only difference now is that when something goes right, I don't pick a fight to get near her. I just tell her. Out loud, directly, The first true thing instead of the 40-minute argument standing in for it. She says she misses the arguments. We have them anyway, for sport. And then I tell her the real thing underneath, every time. Because I spent 3 years letting the rivalry say it for me, and I'm done outsourcing the most important sentence of my life. What would you have done if you overheard the person you'd been fighting with for years confess to someone else that they'd been in love with you the whole time? And have you ever turned a feeling into conflict because the conflict felt safer than the truth? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.